Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, your source for an economic perspective on salient current events impacting our public policy, our economic outcomes, and our overall society. The national sports media is the perfect example of pundits that want to shape how we view our favorite teams, their performances, and the players we support. The inconsistent hysteria-driven narratives help push sports fans in one direction then another, many times without proper context or comprehensive outlooks. My Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl last year, but from the media coverage, you would believe it was decades ago. The past season was far from ideal, but I think the narratives about our potential in the future are a bit far-fetched, in the same manner that they did in 2023. A year later we made it back to the Super Bowl and won our second title. First, part of a narrative is having a base with something that people would acknowledge as true or something that cannot be ignored. The issues with our offense, including the regression of our run game beyond the expectations, the lack of an effective pass game, and the resulting changes in our offensive coaching staff. I agree that losing Jeff Stoutland is a significant departure for the Eagles and the effectiveness of our offensive line. Stoutland is clearly one of the best in the business, despite having an obvious down year, and it is a mistake not to keep him, and the replacement hopefully able to perform better than his recent stats have shown. His lines have been middle of the pack. Another concern is the lack of play-calling experience in our offensive coordinator following having an offensive coordinator that lacked play-calling experience. But in Sean Mannion, I think the upside and the staff around him may help him adapt better. It is definitely a risk that may not pay off, but hiring retreads do not guarantee success either, especially on offense where innovation is a premium. The part of the narrative that I disagree with is the overt criticism of Jalen Hurts. There are those that defend Hurts and others who are complete detractors, which does not help. In reality, Hurts is a really good quarterback with plenty of tools to continue to be successful. He is not Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes, but he can make our offense work. The sports pundit loves to point out the common cliché that past performance is an indicator of future success or failure, and Hurts has been overall successful. Most importantly, he has performed well many times before, giving me confidence that he is able to be an effective passer and do all the things needed for a franchise quarterback. He may never throw the perfect ball, but he protects the football, has an effective deep ball, and can run the ball safely for the most part. Like every quarterback, the better the talent around them, the better their performance will be, and he has been the effective maestro of our talent in the past and can do it again. I do not think we need a gunslinger who throws picks at the wrong time. We need to get back to the time where our offense can get a lead, sustain drives and build on the lead, then shorten the game, and reduce the opportunities for our opponents. That approach makes the Eagles unstoppable. The key is to be able to sustain drives, get first downs, and score with long sapping drives. I agree that our window may be impacted by the need to restock our coaching staff after next year, where Vic Fangio will probably choose retirement, but we will still have top-of-the-league talent, still have a great front office, and a head coach that connects with his players and motivates them. These same voices that are calling for a Seahawks dynasty will probably be doing a 180 once the 49ers and the Rams win both of their games against them next year, because that division is not far apart, but the media wants you to believe that Seattle will be a dynasty. The importance of seeing things the way they truly are is important. Doing so requires us to question what we are told, what we see in broadcasts, and what we read in news content. We must understand the angles the content creators took when presenting their argument in the form of an article, broadcast, or podcast episode. Now, let us look at this issue outside of the world of sports.
A topic that really is not controversial at all in the overall American public. The public has consistently made it clear how they view the issue of voter identification as being required for casting a ballot in our elections. Americans clearly support the basic measure of protecting the integrity of our elections and making sure that only those legally entitled to. It is not radical to expect one to provide proof of who they are when accessing services or being allowed to enter certain spaces. We must have a driver's license present on us when we drive a car. Not some of the times or when it is convenient. We must have identification when traveling to prove we are the person we claim to be. And to enter any government building at any level, you must provide an identification. To obtain a license in certain states, you must provide numerous documents to prove your identity. Look at the requirements for real ID. And for the politicians that are standing in opposition, they must have forgotten it was their party that wanted everyone to show vaccine cards to return to normal life. The side of overregulation wants less regulation for something that truly needs to be protected and secured. For any voter that cast ballots in the state of New Jersey, you must present some form of identification to vote and sign attesting that you are who is casting the ballot. Not a new requirement. something that is required for decades. Not a burden or something to complain about. It does nothing to slow the process down or deny anyone their rights. In our modern society, the idea that obtaining an ID is an insurmountable burden is completely ridiculous. You simply must fill out a form, provide some proof, and then you get an ID. We need to stop pretending people are incapable of doing basic functions. We must stop pretending people are completely helpless. There is a cost issue. Fees for government services rarely ever go down, and they will go to great lengths to make sure they get every nickel. So, it may be fair to provide the ID free of charge for people who are unable to afford it. May allow them to use that money for non-essential purchases. Consider it the one thing that the government does for society without some form of payment. We cannot ignore what we see with our own eyes. The purposeful effort to rig elections by swaying census results with open border policies. Are we really supposed to believe that it was a complete coincidence that they stopped asking for immigration status during the census and then started moving illegals into communities in the middle of the night? Are we supposed to ignore the efforts of the left to start to enable illegals to vote in local elections when they do not legally reside in those communities? That is like asking a home invader what they want for dinner or what they want to add to the grocery list for the week. Sorry, but you must be in good standing to participate in critical decisions like who will lead our government. That is common sense. Should not be controversial. And people complaining that presenting an ID every time should probably remember to wear their hockey helmets daily.
The media wants to make a convenient narrative around the controversy around having Bad Bunny as the Super Bowl halftime show, as something as convenient as one side being open to diversity and another side not liking the fact that Bad Bunny is a person of color representing the Latino culture, which is not based on fact. Sure, there are some people who may not have wanted him because of his demographics. There are always fringes who do not like people for the way they look, speak, vote, or party affiliation. Others may not like the fact that the show was not understood by the bulk of the audience viewing the event. But the league is trying to grow its reach. They could have done it in a more balanced manner. But that is not really a big issue. Set aside the fact that Bad Bunny was the halftime show. Is he still controversial? Yes, not because of his background. He is an American and a global music star. At the same time, he is using his platform to spread messages that are not based on truth and fact, but political bias narratives and hysteria, essentially misinformation. Go back to the speech during the Grammys, where he called out ICE with a claim that they are removing Americans by force, breaking up American families. A lie that has been peddled by left-wing sympathizers as the narrative of choice, because it may appeal to some weak-minded people that are absent from the facts. The reality, of course, is that ICE is removing people who are here illegally and many times have other crimes besides the crime of illegal immigration. The fact is that illegal immigration is a crime and multiple violations make it a higher crime. Also, the vast majority of those being removed have multiple violations and crimes, violent or non-violent, which makes it a good thing to remove the criminal element from our society. Our communities should not be safe havens from those avoiding justice in their home nations. If these liberals were a victim of a crime, they would want to see justice be served and the person held accountable in a fair and just manner. Removal and return to the nation of origin is a fair approach to the problem that illegal immigration has caused. Now, why are there some people still peddling a clear and obvious lie that is so transparently dishonest? Because, like many narratives, there is a complete lack of intellectual honesty in the fact that the narrative creators will change their perceptions to account for the lie. As the Seinfeld line once said, if you believe it, then it is not a lie. So if you incorrectly believe that the people in North America and South America are all Americans, then you can convince yourself that Americans are being removed, when in fact the people being removed are not Americans. Inconvenient to their beliefs, Americans are people in the United States. People from Canada are Canadians. People from Mexico are Mexicans. People from Cuba are Cubans. People from the United States are Americans. Facts. Consider the thing that bothers many people who come from nations in the continent of Africa. Many of these left-wing sympathizers apply that same logic to call these individuals Africans, which is something people from nations on the continent of Africa do not like. Africa is a continent of 54 or 58, depending on recognized borders, with nations that have mostly distinct cultures, traditions, and norms that are unique to their identity. Now, we can agree that it would be nice if we could all get along better with our neighbors and work closer together to protect our common interests. But we cannot overlook the issues and political behaviors that have created problems that place wedges in cooperation. For instance, nations that have foolishly embraced poverty and political violence that comes with socialism in all its forms are creating externalities that negatively impact other nations. It would be nice if every time we wanted to eat out, we could just walk into a neighbor's house and grab a bite or go to a restaurant and pass the bill to the table of the perceived better-off family in the room. But that is theft. Most people would prefer that you were invited to a dinner party, ask before expecting automatic assistance. Also, if we did work closer together, these nations would align with the United States rather than Russia, China, or Iran. They would embrace Western values that allow for cooperation and collegial growth, rather than simply grift and deflect responsibility. I think having greater cooperation across our continents with respect to the individual nations could be a good thing. But we must do it in an honest manner that is not creating harm. If we want to be more economically and diplomatically inclusive, then many of these nations should consider having a market economy and engaging in trade of goods and services that people want. Consider not smuggling drugs and narcotics or dangerous chemicals derived from China to American markets. We cannot hope that people will do the right thing, but ensure that they do before allowing them to partner with us. Colleges and universities do not admit people hoping that they can handle the workload and expectations. They usually vet them first and determine the probability of succeeding. There is always a vetting process. Remember all those calling for vetting people based on vaccine status. If you are going to get political, at least be honest. I could understand people who do not like what the mass deportations may look and feel like, but stop pretending that the people being removed are innocent because they are not. Sure, there may be some mistakenly arrested, but that is extremely rare. Did we stop vaccinating because of side effects? No, we just were more cautious with how we selected who can receive it or not.
The weird pick for Kamala Harris vice president candidate and current Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, where he complains that the federal government needs to provide some form of compensation for the situation in Minnesota. Another situation where a radical alters what is right and wrong in their mind to believe that something is not their own doing. The situation in Minnesota is the direct result of the progressive government not cooperating with basic law enforcement protocol. They appear to be cooperating now. But they should have been cooperating since day one. Especially for illegals that are in custody with their own law enforcement. At the very least, Walz and the rest of the delusional Democrats should have been willing to ensure justice was given to those who broke additional laws. But they fabricate in their minds to believe that crime is not a crime. Also, it was not the federal government that encouraged people to insert themselves in efforts to apprehend some of the worst people on earth. That was the radical government that air quotes trained watchers and encouraged people they viewed as pawns to stir up good trouble. Then these pawns got themselves in bad trouble. Arresting people who broke our immigration laws is not immoral, unjust, or any form of wrong. It is the function of every government law enforcement agency to enforce the laws they are tasked to and ensure compliance. Just because it is inconvenient with the broader goals for the Democratic Party to influence the allocation of congressional seats and federal funds, it does not make it a social tragedy for enforcing laws. Tim Walz and the rest of his cronies caused the situation in Minnesota through piss-poor leadership. In addition to scamming American taxpayers with the Somali welfare fraud. Americans need to understand the capacity of the left and see through the blatant lies of these Soviets in disguise. Bad disguise. Walz and his fellow Democrats are not about leadership, policy effectiveness, or the good of the American citizens. They are about power and their special interests that they prop up with slanted programs that divert money or market preference to benefit. Just like any socialist movement, the people become pawns for the political figures. The people of Minnesota are not victims of the federal government, but victims of the fools they elected in the state and local governments. They are the ones that convince them to take actions that put themselves in harm. They are the ones that refuse to cooperate with what is a basic law enforcement process because of obedience to political hatred. Unlike his hands, he cannot shake responsibility for his own failed leadership.
The American economy is back, and there is a real potential for a golden age, considering strong GDP growth, better than expected employment, and a focus on domestic production that will help protect our domestic supply chain. Inflation is being reined in with key prices dropping, including housing, food, and fuel. The average person who relies on the legacy media may not be aware of the turnaround that our economic data shows because the media is using the same playbook used during the first Trump presidency, which was to attempt to maintain a level of tension and anxiety with the hope that Americans would overlook the actual policy outcomes in favor for their narrative machine. The reality is that the policy changes have worked overall. Global trade has been rebalanced for the most part because of trade deals that followed the tariff campaign that forced our global trade partners to the negotiating tables. This will remove much of the protectionism over time and can be good for all parties if we commit to fair free trade with nations that have shared values. I did have concerns about how strongly the Trump administration went at our allies over issues like NATO funding and some cozying up to Russia and China, which is actually a legitimate issue. NATO was collectively living up to its commitments from a funding perspective. If there really is going to be a collective defense, then there cannot be any weak links that are not properly funded or trained, especially when closer to threat than the nation farther away and paying all the bills. It may have been uncomfortable, but it was necessary to show Russia and China that there is a true united and able counter to their aggression. Rather than funding wars, there is a better approach in deterring them from starting by having our enemies know that there are allies able to stand up to them and participate in the defense. Democrats and the media may want to believe that Trump has been on the wrong side of every issue, but the American people are finally experiencing the right outcomes from public policy. The economy is restoring hope for Americans, the world is starting to move back to peace, and the American economy is less reliant on external supply chains and a bit less susceptible to foreign crises.
The goal is not to shift from viewing the world from one lens to the other, but to see what is really occurring, and stop the effectiveness of the managed approach by political systems, like the media, social engineering campaigns, and other influences. The reason why people want to silence voices, manage speech, and determine from a centralized approach of what prevailing opinions should be is to control society. Have the illusion of a free society without the political inconveniences of one. The media and the left have been wrong on everything and purposefully dishonest. Still have not been completely honest about why the media did not really know who was running the nation during the prior administration. Most importantly, why they never questioned it. Yet, we are supposed to trust their perspective. We should be free-thinking, cynical citizens that trust what can be proven. Not because we like the speaker, but we agree with the facts. Trust what can be verified. Not someone's managed public personality. Thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.